Hi, I'm Reed Peterson, and welcome to Grief Refuge. Thanks for listening today and trusting Grief Refuge as a resource to help cope with your loss and navigate your grief. I'd like to personally welcome you, whether this is your first time listening or if you've heard my voice before. Grief Refuge is about providing daily support to help you find peace and purpose after experiencing a death-related loss. This podcast was created with the intention to help validate everything that you're going through, to take time to reflect and to honor your loved one. Here at Grief Refuge, you will learn healthy ways to manage grief. You can also find comfort, hopefulness, and a sense of peace in regards to your loss, as well as finding a way to embrace life and move forward again. Through the stories and the conversations shared on this podcast, my intention is to help you work through the heavier, more painful feelings that go hand in hand with grief. Grieving hurts, and it's hard to manage. I'm glad you're here, and I promise to do everything I can to provide the best support to you. Before we begin, I want to mention a couple important points. Because of the depth and the nature of this topic, it may be more beneficial to not multitask while listening. Rather, I invite you to use this time for your self-care and your personal reflection. Please use this time to settle in, to relax, and to allow your grief-related feelings to run their course. If anything, please use this time to mourn your loss. Also, this podcast publishes episodes twice a month. And when you're grieving, that's a lot of time in between each episode, and you may find that you need more resources to feel fully supported. So if you're in a place of needing more support, I really suggest to download the Grief Refuge app. The Grief Refuge app helps provide comfort and support on a daily basis. On the Grief Refuge app, there are daily mini podcasts that help validate grief, to help provide tools and perspective for grieving, and help you sort through the thoughts and the feelings that come up when you're dealing with such loss and such grief. The Grief Refuge app is easy to find. It's a free download from your phone's app store. Please download it now to get started. Thank you, and let's move on to today's topic. It's very rare to hear someone who works as a clinical psychologist and also share the gift of communicating with deceased loved ones. Today's guest, Dr. Amy Robbins, is that person. Dr. Robbins is a psychologist in the Chicago area, and she has a powerful story of losing her aunt unexpectedly, grieving, and then opening up to communication with loved ones who have crossed over. Dr. Robbins has a very practical approach to supporting people pained by loss. Her experience is very interesting, and I hope you enjoy her story and reflections on her own personal loss, her grief, and developing communication with loved ones who are on the other side. Please enjoy the interview and the conversation with Dr. Amy Robbins. All right. Well, special guest today, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Amy Robbins. Thanks for being a part of Grief Refuge.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, a little bit of backstory. I'm a listener of your podcast, It's not The Life. Is it Life, Death, and the Space in Between?
The Space Between, yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
What am I in between? I don't know yet. We'll figure that one out. But definitely a fan of your podcast because one of the things that really stands out is as I listen, I kind of listen to tone of voice and how hosts of podcasts speak. And when I listen to your podcast, Amy, I really hear the care in your voice. And I really wanted you to know that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I got so curious because you've got this really, in my opinion, I've yet to meet anyone else who has kind of this hybrid blend of skills, we'll call them for lack of a better term, in that you're a clinical psychologist and practice psychotherapy, and you also have mediumship abilities. Is that correct?
Yes, although my mediumship abilities seem to wax and wane depending on how focused I am on them. But yes.
Okay. So great. That's actually really interesting. Does that mean that there's like, you really need to set intentions and you really need to like focus in regards to the mediumship?
Yeah, I think for me, there are some people that seem to come to the work quite naturally, the mediumship work quite naturally. It's been in their family for generations. Their parents had experiences connecting with the other side. For me, that was not the case. My experience was I started having visits after the death of my aunt and then subsequent deaths of other loved ones and patients and things along those lines. And at that point, really looked to try to understand what was happening to me and develop my skill set a bit. And so, it's sort of like riding a bike. If you don't do it all the time, you can be a little rusty. And that's why I feel like I've actually, as of late, been feeling really pulled back into that space a little bit more and really wanting to be more purposeful in my connection to the other side. Whereas for a period of time, I've been really focused on my podcast. And obviously during COVID, my clinical work was really, really a priority. And I felt like in some ways it sort of took me out of that space between that I love so much, which is that space of connecting and feeling like there is something bigger, larger, greater than just me out there, than just each one of us individually that are here. And so I'm really finding like this yearning to to be able to start to reconnect more in that way.
I am just fascinated. And I guess going back to the loss of your aunt, may I ask her name?
Sure. Her name was Linda.
Linda. And would you be willing to share a little bit about the bond that you had with Aunt Linda?
Yeah, absolutely. So my aunt was 40. I always say 48. For some reason in my mind, she was 48. She might have been 49 or 47, but she was 48 at the time of her death. She died from complications from juvenile onset diabetes. So she had been diagnosed when she was 10. She had she had mumps and then, or measles, I can't remember. And then she had actually strep throat often. And the treatment for strep throat back then was radiation. And as a result of that, developed, I think it was measles. And then as a result of that, an autoimmune condition, which they believe led to the juvenile onset diabetes. She was very sick throughout her life, on and off, certainly when she was a young child, in and out of hospitals. This was my mom's oldest sibling, her older sister. And I think that, her role in my life, my family's very close, and she was like a second mother to me in many ways. She and my mom looked very similar. We spent a lot of time together, our families. And so there really was this sense of closeness. And when she died, it was really the first, what I call an out of order death. It didn't fall in the way that we usually think death should fall. She wasn't old. She wasn't dying of a long illness. It wasn't cancer. I mean, it was a long illness, but not as we think of it, where it's like a slow progression towards death. It really happened quite quickly. She was waiting for a kidney and pancreas transplant. And while she was waiting, they needed to make sure that her other organs would have been strong enough to withstand the transplant. And when they went in, her heart wasn't, and they couldn't get her heart restarted, and she died on the table. And so for me, it was my first real experience with a traumatic death. I had great grandparents, actually, not even grandparents. I had great grandparents who had died. All of my grandparents died in the last 10 years. So they really lived quite a long time. And so this really shook me to my core and left me questioning, what is this world that we're living in, where a young mother, because she had young kids, not super young kids, but youngish kids, college age and high school age, could be taken from where a mother could be taken from her children, and what what happens when we die and why. I mean, I remember I read at the time Rabbi Kushner's book, when bad things happen to good people, really struggling to understand what was happening.
And so was there a specific incident that opened you up to receiving messages from what I would call spiritual dimensions? I don't know if you have a different terminology for.
Yeah, I just say the other side or spiritual dimensions, any of that I think is sort of interchangeable. Shortly before my cousin's wedding, her son, I had what some people would call a dream. I would call a visit. She came to me. In this visit, she showed me my mom standing at our kitchen sink crying, loading the dishwasher. And she said to me, tell your mom she doesn't need to be upset. I'll be at the wedding. And then I had another vision of my uncle and her brother. She had a younger sister, my mom, and then a younger brother, my uncle. And my uncle was pushing my cousin in the stroller, and he was out walking. And she said, tell Uncle Richie that every time he talks to me when he's out walking, I hear him. I hear him talking to me. And so I woke up. This was one of those, like when you wake up and fall back to sleep, in between, like those twilighty dreams almost. And I looked at my husband, I woke him and I said, Aunt Linda was just here. She just left. I mean, it was so real to me. And I called my mom that morning and I said, Mom, I had this really weird dream. You were standing at the kitchen sink, you were crying, and Aunt Linda came to me and she told me, don't be upset. You don't need to be upset. She's going to be at the wedding. And then my uncle, same thing, I called him. I said, Uncle Richie, Aunt Linda, I had this dream. Aunt Linda came to me. She told me that she hears you when you talk to her, when you're out walking or running. And he said, that's always why when I'm talking to her. And so this was the beginning, but it definitely wasn't sort of the moment that really opened, that really kind of pushed me. For probably about 15 years, there were experiences like this where, and actually in hindsight, after having this experience, I then recalled another experience that happened shortly after her death, where she came to me and said to tell my mom to tell everybody, not just my mom, that she was okay, that she was healthy, that her body had healed, that she was doing much better. And I remember seeing her and her coloring just looking better. Her coloring was always a little bit off. And just thinking, oh my gosh, she looks so vibrant and alive and healthy. But it wasn't until much later that I realized that was also probably a visit. When my grandfather died, it happened again. And then it really started happening with patients' loved ones, where they started coming through in the same way, through this sort of dream visit state. And then I really struggled with what to do with all of it, because as a therapist, I'm trained, very clinically, very, very traditionally. And I was having these spiritual experiences that were leaving me very open and curious and wondering, but I didn't feel like I could share those things with patients. So I had to really figure out what to do with all of this.
Well, I definitely want to know the answer to that. What did you figure out to do with that? But maybe we can come back to that. I guess going back into your history a little bit, I also want to say, I just feel great about honoring Linda, sharing these experiences too, because I've never met Linda, but yet, wow, I just feel like I get to know pieces of her through your experiences too. And that's part of my reasoning for loving to have these types of conversations and, in doing this work, because, hey, yeah, the world's got to move on, but in moving on, we can also hold memory and honor all of our loved ones too. I think that's just as valuable as like anything else forward thinking, no matter how much technology progresses. But off my soapbox and back on.
No, I agree with you. I agree. I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to honor someone's memory in that way. And also, she's been my greatest teacher.
And that's really powerful. maintaining that connection.
Mm-hmm.
Amy, I'm so curious, when you started first experiencing the visits, is that when you were getting educated in clinical psychology?
Yeah, it started my first year in graduate school, my first or second year in graduate school. And luckily I had a professor who became a supervisor. And actually I just spoke to her last night around some stuff that I've been kind of thinking about in terms of feeling this pull back to mediumship, because she understands it. And there aren't very many, I don't think there would have been very many people who at the time would have said to me what she said, which is, I think you're opening up to something and I think you need to explore it.
Wow.
And she didn't shut it down. You know, she was like, this is very real and you have an opportunity here and you should pursue it. I didn't at the time.
You didn't?
I did not. Mm-mm.
Okay, so what did you do with it?
I chalked it up to a one-time thing, moved on. And that was when my papa and my patient's loved one came through. That was when I decided I needed to kind of get a sense of what was happening. Things were happening in my house, electricity going on and off. It was really felt like an invasion in a lot of ways. And so I felt like I needed to get a handle on it. And I worked with a medium for a couple of years, kind of training and learning how to connect, how to open myself up, how to invite spirit in, when to invite spirit in, how to protect myself, you know, sort of the ins and outs of dealing with the spirit world, which isn't all that different from just in terms of boundaries, how you deal in the material world. And then again, found myself not really feeling moved to do the mediumship work. It was fun, it was interesting, but my clinical work and being a mom, and I had at that point I had 2 kids and really focused on that. I mean, I was a mom of young kids and focusing on building my career and really apprehensive about what it would mean for me to put myself out there as a clinical psychologist. I have a license that I, you know, have ethics and licensing requirements and all of these real practical pieces, but also having this really strong spiritual pull that was eating at me. And I actually had a woman reach out to me at some point and say, I heard you're interested in this. I'd love to practice with you. Let's each bring in a friend and we'll practice. And so I thought, okay, there's no harm there. So she brought a friend, I brought a friend. And over the course of this reading that I did for my friend, her father-in-law came through, and he came through and he gave me several messages for her, which I don't remember because I don't usually remember. I'm in a different state, so I don't remember what I said, but I guess I had told them, I know I had told them that her father-in-law was showing me a ring with a blue stone. And it was like one of those old graduation rings. And she went home and told her husband, and he sort of dismissed it and said, my dad didn't wear jewelry. He would have never worn a ring like that. He proceeds to go home to his childhood home in Philadelphia. And while he's there, his mom walks out shortly after he gets there. And she says, I just found this ring from your dad. I think he'd want you to have it. And it was the exact ring as I had described it. And his mind was blown. My mind was blown. And he said, I want to schedule a reading with you. And that really kind of pushed me to do more readings. But ultimately, I decided that really wasn't the direction I wanted to head in. It felt very kind of unidimensional to me. And my clinical work is so multidimensional and rich that it felt like it wasn't quite enough. I wasn't quite doing the work that I love to do. And so again, reassessed, okay, well, how do I want to use this work? What do I want to do? I love talking about it. I'm so passionate about it. And that's sort of where the birth of the podcast came out of, is How can I talk about this in a way that's really grounded, but that helps people start to open up, start to be curious, start to want to explore some of these other ways of thinking that we might do behind closed doors, curled up on a bed with Brian Weiss's Many Lives, Many Masters, or Michael Newton's Journey of Souls, but we don't talk about. And I really wanted to open up that conversation in a really practical way. Now, do I know for sure that our conscious soul exists once our physical body is gone? I believe that to be true. Do I know for sure? No. But I want people to be curious, and I'm curious. And I think that that's probably, when you talk earlier about what you hear from me in the podcast, is I have a genuine curiosity and care for humanity. And if this information can help people, can help open them up, can help them live some of the magic that I've been able to live, then what a gift.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, I tell you what, you definitely are just providing a gift to the world and bridging the gap, because I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like your interviews and your conversations shared on your podcast, they are very grounded, and they're very grounded in a healthy balance between what could easily be perceived as, hey, clinical perspectives, which often requires empirical research and empirical evidence, and, being sometimes extremely heady. I know from personal experience, I'm married to a clinical psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
But then, a lot of people, look at the perspective of believing and communicating with spirits, and that being way woo-woo. I think that's the best terminology. And
Yeah.
so, like, what a healthy blend and what a gift to bring that. I just find it so intriguing, because I have my own personal experiences that I would call spiritual. Those are my proof that there's probably something greater than just my mind and my body, and totally crazy experiences. It actually led me to going to the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, which nobody heard of at the time. They were like, what's this? It's like this on its own little island. And man, some of the things we studied was really cool. But then some of the things that were missing experiences in graduate school almost felt like it was like this denial of the shadow. Like, hey, we're humans, and there's oftentimes things that really, really are hard and really struggle. And yet, why are we, so focused on, some of that toxic positivity that's so common these days. But I'm getting a little bit off track. Sorry, I'm going to get back on track,
No.
Amy.
I'm following you.
The floodgates are opening here. But so you've got me extremely curious about your clinical practice. Did you say it was multidimensional? Is that the term you used, or multifaceted? I can't remember.
Yeah, I said multidimensional, meaning more that there's an opportunity to really dig into and connect and have real relationships. I mean, I work from a more traditional psychodynamic relational kind of bent, but I now am at a place where if I do get messages, I bring those in. For those patients who I know are okay with it, are curious about it, would be open to it, and have said to me, particularly if we're working with the grief, who've said to me, if you do happen to get a message, can you just pass it along? And I will do that. But I don't seek out, like, I don't do readings in my sessions, but oftentimes, because I'm open, because I'm so connected to the person I'm working with, sometimes those messages come through very, very clearly, and I can't not give them, because I can't focus on the clinical part because the message is coming in so strong.
So interesting. Is your practice full? Do you have 20 to 30 clients a week?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so is there, is there a ballpark figure of percentages of about how many times something like that happens where, you focused on psychodynamics and all of a sudden you do get a visit or some kind of message?
It's pretty rare. I would say like it's happened like maybe 3 or 4 times.
Okay. And then in your clinical practice, do you focus on grief?
Well, that's an interesting question. When I think about how we define grief in this culture, I think grief is always happening. So we're always transforming, we're always transitioning. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, then we're always grieving a part of ourselves that's dying and a part of ourselves that's growing. And so my practice isn't a grief practice. I actually don't, even when people say to me, like, are you a grief therapist? I don't want to be in that space. I really like to be in the space of like shifting people to life. And I think that's what a grief therapist does. But my focus is not just grief in the traditional way we think of grief.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I think any therapist is always dealing with grief.
I definitely agree. I also respect your perspective because what I've learned in some of the helping rules that I've provided in the work that I do is that oftentimes in our culture, specifically in American society, a lot of people who are openly accepting that they are grieving, they also think that they have some kind of problem that needs to be fixed. And I just don't believe that grief works that way. Similar to you, I think, yeah, even I don't really conceptualize it as like a daily experience that, there's losses and there's gain and growth and all the time. But taking it all in as a big picture, I definitely agree with you. There's always grief experiences. For example, like only 6 months ago, my wife and I were forced to move because we were renting this beautiful home by the ocean. And then all of a sudden the owner of the home's like, who was living in New York at the time, by the way, I live in California, said, hey, I'm moving back to my place. You guys got to go. And we didn't want that. And so that was a loss in and of itself. And so there, to this day, it's 6 months later that experience happened. I still think, oh, I miss walking down the street to the ocean from where we used to live.
Yeah, I would too.
So there are these grief experiences that, are more common than what we're, I think in a general sense, in a general society that we're willing to admit that happens. And so I really appreciate your perspective because it does help normalize grief too, because often grief is stigmatized, it's tabooed, it's everything that, people say, oh, this gives me a reason to deny it or somehow avoid it.
Well, and I think even great experiences bring about grief. Weddings, babies, we are stepping into something, but we are also losing something. And anytime there's a loss, there's grief. I mean, we started this conversation. You said you're a mom, and I probably have hungry mouths to feed. And I said, I have one mouth, not 3. Normally I have 3. 2 of my kids are at sleepaway camp, and I know that's amazing for them, and I miss them, and it's a loss. And there are times over the course of the summer where I think, oh, kind of wish they were here. But I know that they're in a good place and that they're having the time of their lives and, having fun and being kids and away from electronics. And so it's always balancing those feelings. You said earlier, this notion of the shadow side of ourselves. We have to be willing to hold both of these pieces of ourselves, all of these parts of ourselves. I mean, I usually think unconscious when we talk about shadow. That's just for me. I don't know. The shadow is like getting a lot of, I feel like a lot of Instagram press right now. It's like everybody's talking about the shadow, the shadow, the shadow. And I'm always like, yeah, I feel like, therapists it's a Jungian term, but therapists are always working with those parts of ourselves that we want to disavow, that we don't want to look at because they're painful. And oftentimes with that comes shame about feeling these things. But they're not necessarily bad. They're only bad because we've determined that when you feel loss or grief or anger or anxiety, that's a bad feeling, and joy and happiness and contentment and all these other feelings are good feelings. That's just, we've socially constructed that.
This is a really cool conversation. I'm so appreciating this.
It goes, with me, it could go like all different directions. It could go totally spiritual. Sometimes there's a little bit of psychology in there. It just depends.
Well, I'm digging it. And so, it gets me thinking though, like I couldn't agree with you more. I think you gave us such a beautiful example of two of your three children away at summer camp and missing them and experiencing grief and related to, even though you can confidently believe they're having the time of their lives, right? Well, so it makes me wonder for you, Amy, and leaning into maybe some of the exercises or tools, for lack of better terms, that you share with your clients. What do you do to cope with these types of everyday losses and everyday experiences?
Well, I do a lot. I meditate daily. I am really vigilant, not only to cope with like all of that, but to cope with my own feelings, but also when you're managing 20 other patients a week, plus my own children and family and things like that. I really work hard to take care of myself, exercise, I live in Chicago in the city, so sometimes it's a little more difficult to connect with nature, but really trying to find places of space. And even as of late, I've been finding myself really yearning for like quiet and alone time. So being really conscious of carving that out more for myself. And that was actually a message I heard pretty strongly from Spirit just yesterday. Like you aren't listening. You need to be listening. Mm-hmm. And so I take those hits. Some people call them hits. Some people call them downloads. Some people call them moments of flashes of intuition. Some call it spirit communication. For me, like I heed those voices very seriously, because I know that my higher self, my spirit guides, loved ones, whatever it is, my team that's on the other side that's guiding me, if they're intervening to say, hey, you need to listen, I better be listening, because they're always coming from a place of what is for my best and highest self. And then I do little practical things. I smudge, I take Epsom salts baths at the end of the day. I go for walks, I connect with friends, carve out time to take vacations when I can. It's sort of a real holistic picture of how I view my own kind of self-care in this space.
Mm-hmm. And is it fair to say that you're, at least, I was going to say adamant, but I don't know if that's the right word, but you're consistent with scheduling your needs when you recognize what they are?
Yeah, I guess you could say scheduling. I mean, for me, it doesn't feel like so much of a schedule. It feels like it's just, it's part of, it's like brushing my teeth. I don't schedule brushing my teeth. It's just something I do. And it's the same with, meditation, with exercise. Obviously some things are scheduled. My nightly baths, those are just things that I need to do in order to be as effective as I can be, whether that's as a therapist or a mom or connecting.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. And the reason why I'm probing a little bit on that is because, again, in the realm of grief work that I do, I often hear a lot of people who are experiencing immense and sometimes very acute and intense grief. And they're basically speaking to almost feeling paralyzed. Mm-hmm. And they just can't get that self-nudge to initiate something that would care for some of their own personal needs. And so some of my recommendations in the past have been like, hey, put it on your iPhone calendar, set a reminder. So it dings you, it lets you know, hey, it's time to do whatever, the preferred self-care regimen is. But I just, unfortunately, it's like I understand why it doesn't happen, but at the same time, I see it too much that people deep in grief aren't getting their needs met because certain circumstances happen, and it prevents them from actually taking care of their needs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of like one client in particular. He just loves to ride his bicycle, and yet it was kind of a trigger experience for him, not because it had anything related to do to his spouse's death, but because it kept reminding him that he was so alone if he got on his bicycle and rode.
Mm-hmm.
And then now he's done quite a bit of healing and a lot of personal work, and he says he has a new puppy, and so he lets his new puppy prevent him from getting outside and getting on his bicycle because his puppy isn't fully vaccinated yet, and he doesn't want his puppy to get rabies and all this stuff. And I'm like, I keep listening. I'm like, okay, there's truth in these, but are these also like experiences that, just let him give himself permission to not put energy into his own healing, or more energy into his own healing? Because I want to give him credit. He has been putting energy into his healing. So that's why I was probing a little bit, Amy. I thank you. And so, okay, all right, just a really practical question. As a mother of 3 and running a household, in addition to being a career-oriented woman, how do you carve out the time to meditate?
I wake up in the morning, I come upstairs, and I sit. And, my kids are a little bit older now, so it's easier because they know when I'm sitting, that's my quiet time. And sometimes they'll talk to me and I'll respond with my eyes closed, and I'll just try to slip right back into the meditation. So, I get being, again, busy is not one of my favorite words, because I think sometimes we also create busyness a little bit. And I think that you can find time. You can find 5 minutes. You can, take even a minute in between part of your day, in between a meeting, in between a lunch, in between whatever it is, just to close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. You could start that small. It doesn't need to be more than that. It really doesn't. And I find when I get out of, the habit of meditating, if there's a period of time where I'm not, I find my body craving it in the same way that I crave exercise or water. I'm really thirsty right now. My water ran out. That you start to crave, it's sort of not dissimilar from when people say, if you switch your diet, initially you'll still crave the sugar and the chocolate and the salt, but that when you switch it and you start eating healthier foods, fruits, vegetables, things along those lines, that eventually your taste buds change and you don't crave the garbage anymore. You just crave the good stuff. And then the garbage doesn't taste so good to you. And I think of all of these practices as the same. You can start small. You can meditate in the shower. You can close your eyes. I mean, that's sometimes when I have my best moments of insight and intuition, is when I'm in the shower. Not because dead people are in there with me talking to me. I mean, they might be, but.
Can you hand me the soap, please?
Right. Can someone just wash my hair?
Oh, that's fantastic. Cool. Well, yes, thank you for the practical wisdom in regards to I kind of heard it as like, I just do it. And so, hopefully that is motivation for people listening. And, they may be thinking, maybe I do come up with some excuses to not allow myself to do X, Y, Z. Maybe I should just do it.
And I understand if you're depressed, why that's hard. I from a clinical perspective, can really appreciate that. And this isn't to dismiss those pieces, but I think that, again, it's like if you start, it just sort of keeps going. And sometimes that initiation, particularly for people who are depressed, who have lost loved ones, who are grieving, that initiation piece can be really difficult. Getting up out of bed in the morning can be really difficult.
Mm-hmm. So true. Well, I tell you what, I have one more question for you in our interview
Sure.
today. I don't want to neglect you from getting more water. We need water to live.
No, I'm okay. I'm good.
I'm just teasing, but I really do only have one more question. And I guess, okay, to learn a little bit more about you and how you function, I've heard you speak to, some of the messaging, some of the visits, and you even mentioned intuition. Now, do you consider yourself a planner, or are you someone who kind of responds to the messages the universe are providing for you and spirits, because you can communicate with spirits?
It's interesting because I'm still I'm a recovering type A personality. Maybe I'm not even recovering. Maybe I'm still that. But I've learned really to let go a lot more. So I certainly plan, and I trust. I trust that if plans don't work, it's because there's something greater for me. That doesn't mean that I don't also feel things about the fact that the plan that I planned didn't work out. It's not like I'm just like, oh, this is great. Spirit is going to make sure things are in line for me. But I still have those very human moments of frustration or anger or irritation that, what I planned for, how I planned things, or what I wanted didn't work out. But then I really will come back and I will say something like, Spirit, can you help me? Can you just help me sort through this and show me what it is that I need? Help me work this out, or work this out for me. And now, whether it's my perspective that whatever happens to follow is that working out, it is that it works out for me. And you can say that's not spirit, that's just me. I don't know that they're separate.
Fair enough. So with this unique approach, are there hopes, intentions, visions, desires, whatever you want to call it, for your work going forward?
I'm sorting that out now. I have a lot of hopes. I have a lot of wishes for other people to be able to find this peace in their life, because I think it's such a better way of living. And I can say that from the perspective of someone who really, I said I was a recovering type A personality, but also someone who really struggled with pretty tremendous anxiety, out of college, in college, out of college, and early in my 20s, and really spent a lot of time working through that. And I think that my connection with something greater for me, I'm not saying this is it for everybody. Everybody has to find their own way in their own journey. But for me, freed me up in so many ways. And it's that trust piece. It's that trust that it's going to be okay.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Amy Robbins, it's so been a wonderful experience to get to know you and your work better. It's been awesome to honor your Aunt Linda and just share all the perspectives of how you see life and how you see grief. Thank you so much for being a part of Grief Refuge.
Thank you for reaching out, Reed. I really, really appreciate it. I love talking about all of this. So it's always fun to be the talker.
Thank you so much for listening to the full interview. I'm deeply grateful for your trust in Grief Refuge and all the stories and experiences shared here on this podcast. Grief and healing is important work, and although it's painful at times, it's worth it for helping to heal your heart, your mind, and your soul. Remember that if you need more support right now, download the Grief Refuge app. It's a helpful tool that has daily content that provides comfort and support as you navigate this difficult journey. Please search Grief Refuge on your phone's app store now. Also, please leave a rating and review for this podcast. Your feedback is deeply valued and it's listened to. We want the Grief Refuge podcast to best serve your needs, and the more you let us know, the better we can provide. So please rate and review the Grief Refuge podcast on your favorite podcast player. Thank you, take care, keep honoring your grief, keep listening to your heart, be kind to yourself, and talk to you soon.